This podcast or online lecture focuses on learning intentions. And the reason why we do that is because we want to make the learning explicit to our students. Many of you will have already come across the term learning intention or learning objective. At least I hope by now you have. These are statements that teachers make about what they want their children or their students to understand, to know, or to be able to do at the end of their unit or their lesson that they don't already know or understand or can do. This should always be the starting point for your curriculum design. It shouldn't be something that you retrofit later to activities that you've developed and cobbled together in a unit plan. You need to start with the Oswell's curriculum, unpack that to identify those big ideas that you think are most important, then redefine these in terms of the learning results you want your students to achieve. One of the big ideas I want you to achieve in this course is the understanding that curriculum that is activity-based, that starts with a collection of really great fun things for the kids to do, most often, lacks long-term substance and academic quality. Activity-based units might keep the kids occupied and busy and out of your hair, but that's not your function. You're not here as a babysitter to keep them occupied. You're here to teach them, to move them from where they are now to where they need to be, to build on their existing knowledge and understandings, to develop new understandings about how the world works, new knowledge about things, about facts, new skills and capacities to do things. I recommend that you start with the big idea, those understandings that you want the children to develop. And from that, then identify the specific content, knowledge, the specific skills and processes that you want the students to learn or to master that helps them answer that key question, that big idea. That's the essence of effective curriculum design. Your curriculum planning shouldn't just be about what the students will do. Things like the children will explore, the children will use ICT, the children will create. These aren't learning intentions or learning objectives. They're descriptions of what the children will do, not what they will learn. So they're descriptions of the learning activities, not learning intentions. How to write a learning objective. First of all, start with the STEM. After completing this unit or lesson or task, you will. Then the second step is to insert a verb. A verb that describes the nature of the learning you want your students to achieve. Bloom's taxonomy verbs are a useful starting point. Choose verbs from different parts of Bloom's taxonomy. Include learning intentions that require higher order thinking skills, that require students to analyse, synthesise and evaluate. Learning intentions that focus on conceptual understandings are often harder to write than learning intentions that relate to skills. Often in schools, you might see lots of learning intentions that are skill-based, because these tend to be easier to write. When you are designing new curriculum, however, I want you to challenge yourselves to include some learning intentions that are conceptually based, that are aimed at student understanding of big ideas and concepts that are not just based on skills. Once you've identified the relevant verb for your learning intention, include the outcome, the process or the product. The language around learning intentions has evolved in recent years. We used to talk about learning objectives. Now we tend to refer to these as learning intentions. Regardless of the use, it's important to frame the intention in language that the students in your class will understand. Use child-friendly or age-appropriate language. Make each learning intention achievable and specific rather than trying to make one learning intention capture everything you want your students to achieve in the lesson or in the unit. Make the learning intention challenging. You want to move students along a learning continuum, not have them repeat things they already know and understand and can already do. It's important that students understand what they are being asked to do, so make the learning intentions visible. It gives the students a goal to aim for. It's common practice in classrooms today to write up the learning intention and keep it visible throughout the lesson or the unit. Include success criteria. What will achieving the learning intention look like? How will the students know that they have achieved the learning intention that you have set? Then, at the end of the lesson, or at an appropriate point throughout the unit of work, it's advisable to revisit the learning intentions and the key success criteria, allow students the opportunity to check their progress against the key success criteria. It also makes sense to connect the learning intention to the big ideas that underpin your curriculum design. Students want to know why they are learning things, so you will need to be able to make these links explicit. Is the big idea an important academic skill that they need to develop, or is the big idea connected to a life skill or an understanding that will be important to them outside of school or academic settings? Here are some examples of learning intentions that I've created around the topic of sustainability or the big idea of sustainability. Each of these learning intentions reflects a particular level of Bloom's taxonomy. The first is at the remember stage, where you expect the students to be able to recall the definition of sustainability. This to me is a fairly simplistic learning intention and one that doesn't really address understanding. It's simply a memorisation intention. And I think intentions such as these have limited use because the students aren't really understanding. The second one, explain what sustainability means in his or her own words, is far more important than just being able to recall what the definition is. Often learning intentions at the remember level are linked to rote learning rather than learning where we really develop true meaning. If we wanted to move along the Bloom's taxonomy or higher along the taxonomy, we might be asking students to predict if a particular method of generating energy will be sustainable or not. They're being asked to apply their understanding of what sustainability means to make that prediction. If we want them to move even higher, we might be asking them to be analytical and differentiate between sustainable and unsustainable methods of generating energy. Again, if we want them to be in the top of the Bloom's taxonomy, we might ask them to justify whether using renewable energy or fossil fuel energy would be more appropriate for a sustainable future. Justifying involves making judgments, which is a much higher order thinking skill than simply understanding and remembering. If we really want to be at the pinnacle of Bloom's taxonomy, we'd be asking our students to create, and they would be designing a sustainable energy approach for a city. For those of you doing learning across the curriculum, you might think about where we're asking you to situate yourselves along Bloom's taxonomy. Are we asking you to simply remember things, or are we asking you to justify and design, make recommendations, and in doing so, apply your understanding of what sustainability means and analyse the options that you're discovering as you undertake your research each week? Here are some more examples of learning intentions that I've categorised against skills, knowledge and understanding, the three categories of learning intentions I outlined at the beginning of the lecture. Here are some examples of some particular skills that you might focus on in your learning intentions in your classroom. Students need to be able to write a recount. They need to be able to solve a problem using more than one strategy. You might also decide they need to be able to work as part of a team. Skills learning intentions are very common in primary schools, and this is not surprising, because they're easier to write, and secondly, primary schools are where we lay the foundations for a number of important skills that students need to be academically successful or to be functioning as part of society. We also need to know lots of different things as students at any level. And here's some examples of knowledge learning intentions. We need to know about different types of energy. We need to know what a verb is. We also need to know the elements of a food web and how the earth revolves around the sun. Knowledge is important, but knowledge and skills are not all that we need. We need to join these together to develop understanding. So here are some examples of learning intentions that reflect an understanding. For example, the final example here, we need to understand how our decisions today affect the environment into the future. A really key understanding that goes to the core of our sustainability topic that we're focusing on. I think it's probably timely at this point to try and once again link a lot of these ideas together so that you have clarity of the curriculum designing process. Our starting point with any planning is, of course, our students. We know our students, we know their learning habits, we know their learning interests, we know what they don't know. So that's always our starting point. But when we're planning a new unit of work, we should also be using big ideas that are inherent within our curriculum standards and that are inherent in the world as the basis for our planning. We then move on to determining from what we know our students already know, what the curriculum standards are telling us are the big ideas that we need to instill within our students. We then develop a set of learning intentions and success criteria, and that's where this lecture has been situated. In a forthcoming lecture, we'll also talk about assessment strategies in the sense of how will we know whether our students have achieved that learning intention. And it's then and only then that we start designing those activities, that is, the things that we want students to do to help them achieve or to learn the learning intention. In this course, what I'm also asking you to do is to develop a problem-based learning scenario. Oh, won't work. No. That encapsulates and incorporates the big ideas that you want to convey. So it's a way of designing the sorts of activities that you want them to do in order to achieve the learning intentions linked back to the big ideas. I'm hoping that starts to demystify the approach that we're modelling in this particular course, which is centred around problem-based learning, but where there are still big ideas at the core of our curriculum design, where we're able to articulate learning intentions. We've designed assessment strategies to support the achievement of those learning intentions, and then we've designed specific activities that help align the students with the big ideas, learning intentions, and our assessment strategies. More on assessment strategies in a forthcoming lecture.